Break through the noise of the digital age and see the world with a silver vision that highlights every truth. We redefine the art of digital storytelling by showing you the hidden side of the human heart. Subscribe today and start seeing the world through our lens.
She's already been through so much, my sister-in-law said, not to me, through the crack of my own apartment door. She was explaining herself to my brother, who was standing inside my living room, in my inherited penthouse, that I had been paying the HOA fees on for 11 months while I saved money to move in properly. I had come home 4 days early. My conference in Seattle ended Thursday instead of Monday. I thought I would surprise myself, treat myself to a long weekend alone in the space that was finally mine. Instead, I was surprising my brother Derek and his wife Sandra, who had apparently decided that my 3-bedroom penthouse on the 14th floor was their solution to a problem they had never mentioned to me. "Open the door," I said. My voice was flat. I was not asking. Sandra opened it another 2 inches. She was wearing one of my grandmother Nora's old cardigans, the cream one with the embroidered collar that I had kept hanging in the entryway closet. She had found it. She had put it on, and she did not look embarrassed about any of it. She looked inconvenienced. "Your brother is just getting Talia settled," she said. "Your niece has had a really hard transition, the new school, the move. She finally fell asleep an hour ago." "What move, Sandra?" She sighed, like I was the one being unreasonable. She opened the door wider and stepped aside, and I walked into my own home and saw what they had done to it in 5 days. My grandmother's reading chair had been pushed against the far wall to make room for a portable crib. The dining table was covered in Talia's school papers, a half-assembled IKEA shelf that still had the cardboard packaging on the floor next to it, 2 open suitcases, and a laundry bag that had tipped over and spilled across my hardwood floor. My kitchen smelled like burned tomato sauce. There was a pot soaking in my sink that had not been washed. Derek appeared from the hallway. He had the look he always got when he knew he was wrong but had already decided he was not going to apologize. Chin up a little, shoulders back. The posture of a man preparing to explain why the thing he did was actually reasonable. "You weren't supposed to be back until Monday," he said. I looked at him for a long moment. "I own this apartment," I said. He breathed out slowly. "Look, we were going to tell you. Sandra's lease ended on the 1st and the new place fell through at the last minute, and with Talia's school being in this district anyway, it just made sense temporarily. Mom said you had plenty of space and that you wouldn't mind for a few weeks." Mom said. I turned around. My mother was sitting at my kitchen island. I had not even seen her when I walked in. She was holding a mug. My mug. The heavy blue ceramic one from the pottery class I took 2 years ago, and she was looking at me with the expression she reserved for situations where she had already made a decision and needed me to simply absorb it. "This is not a hotel," I said. She set the mug down carefully. "Vivian, your brother's family needed a safe place. You have 3 bedrooms and you are 1 person. I do not think it is unreasonable to ask you to be a little flexible when family is struggling. You did not ask. You used the emergency key I gave you and you moved furniture into my apartment." She folded her hands. "We knew you were in Seattle. We didn't want to stress you out mid-trip. The plan was to get everyone settled and talk to you when you got home on Monday, so it wouldn't feel like a crisis." "The plan," I said. She nodded, as if this was perfectly logical. As if the timeline they had invented made the trespassing administrative rather than deliberate. "I want to be clear about something. My grandmother, my dad's mother, left me this apartment specifically. Not my brother, not my parents. Me. Because she and I were the ones who spent Sunday afternoons together for 15 years. Because I drove her to her doctor's appointments after her hip replacement. Because I was the one she called when she was scared in the hospital at 2 in the morning and could not reach anyone else. She left me the apartment because she wanted to. It was in the will, clearly, and there had been a period of about 3 weeks where this was a source of significant family tension that I had been made to feel guilty about. Derek had received her car and a cash sum. Sandra had received jewelry. I had received the penthouse. And now Derek's family was sleeping in it and my mother was drinking coffee in my kitchen like it was a negotiation she was confident she would win. "I need some air," I said. "Don't be dramatic," my mother said. I picked up my bag and walked back out the door. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time. The concrete was cold and the fluorescent lights made everything look slightly gray. I called my best friend Diane and she did not answer. I almost called my dad, then remembered he had probably known about this and said nothing. which meant calling him would just add another layer to the thing I was trying to think through. So I sat alone in the parking garage and thought. I had two choices that everyone expected me to make. One was to walk back upstairs, be gracious, give them a move-out date of 3 weeks from now that they would ignore, and spend the next several months being slowly suffocated in my own home. The other was to escalate immediately, call the police, cause a scene, traumatize my 6-year-old niece, who genuinely had nothing to do with this and was probably asleep in my guest room right now not knowing any of it. Both of those were their choices. They had set up the board so that both moves hurt me and neither cost them anything. I was not going to play their game. I got out of the car. I drove to the Marriott 4 blocks away and checked into a room with a desk and a window and a very good Wi-Fi connection. I ordered room service, pasta and a glass of wine, and I opened my laptop. I was a contracts administrator for a commercial real estate company. I reviewed lease agreements for a living. I knew what made a document legally binding and what made it a polite suggestion. And I knew the difference between a tenant, someone with legal possession rights who requires an eviction process that in my state takes between 2 and 6 months, and a licensee, someone whose right to occupy is conditional and revocable at will. My brother did not have a lease. He had broken in using a key given for emergencies. He had no agreement, no rent paid, no rent petition. He was a trespasser. But if I let this go too long, if he enrolled Talia in school using my address and started getting mail here and established residency markers, that calculus could shift in ways that would cost me a lawyer and 6 months of my life to unwind. I had to act fast, and I had to do it in a way that did not give him any additional legal footing. I started writing. Not an eviction notice, not a letter from my lawyer. I was going to do what I do professionally. I was going to offer them exactly what they wanted, wrapped in language they would not read closely enough to understand. My brother was between freelance projects. Sandra had just lost her lease. They were worried about money and stability. They were especially worried about health insurance because Sandra's job at the nonprofit was part-time and Talia had asthma and the medication was not cheap. I knew this because my mother told me everything about Derek's life and nothing about mine. I had cataloged it without meaning to. I typed for 2 hours. When I was done, I had a property caretaker service agreement, 6 pages, clean margins, professional formatting, the kind of document that looks like something a company generates and not something a furious woman wrote in a hotel room while eating penne arrabbiata. The job title, residential property caretaker. The compensation, on-site housing in lieu of salary plus access to a group health insurance plan I had through my employer, which was technically true. I would have to add them, and I had every intention of terminating that addition the moment this was over, but that was a future problem. The duties, light maintenance oversight, accepting deliveries, monitoring common area security. And then the clauses, buried in Section 4, under conditions of housing provision, occupancy of the designated residential unit is granted solely as compensation for services rendered and constitutes a housing license, not a tenancy. No landlord-tenant relationship is established or implied. In Section 7, this agreement and all associated housing privileges terminate immediately upon termination of the caretaker's employment, resignation, or breach of any term herein, without requirement for additional notice. In Section 9, employee consents to installation and operation of security monitoring equipment in all common areas of the property for asset protection and insurance compliance purposes. And in Section 11, employee authorizes employer to conduct a full background check, including credit and civil litigation history, as required for insurance bonding purposes. That last one was the one I needed most. I had a suspicion about Sandra. Not a firm one. Just a thread I had noticed and not pulled on yet. I drove back in the morning, which gave me the night to sleep on it and wake up absolutely certain I still wanted to do this. I did. I texted Derek at 7 a.m. I told him I had thought about it and I wanted to find a real solution, not a fight. I told him I had an idea. I asked him to have everyone up and presentable by 10. He texted back, "Thank you, Viv. I knew you'd come around." I noted the period and the lack of capital letters and felt a very specific kind of tired. When I arrived at 10, Sandra had made coffee. This struck me as a power move, making coffee in my kitchen for me, presenting it to me as hospitality in my own home. But I accepted the mug and sat down and set my folder on the kitchen island. "Look," I said, "I have been thinking about this since last night, and you're right that I have more space than I need right now, and Derek, you are my brother. I do not want us fighting about this." Derek softened visibly. Sandra put her hand on the counter in a way that communicated cautious optimism. But, I said, I cannot have you here informally. My insurance policy requires me to declare any occupants, and if something happens, Talia has an accident, there is a fire, anything, and there is no documentation, I am exposed. And frankly, you are too. Derek nodded slowly. He was an engineer by training. He responded to the framing of risk. So I have drafted something, I said. I slid the folder across the counter. If you come on as the official residential caretaker, I can put you on payroll, light payroll, just enough to qualify you for the benefits package. The housing is compensation. For insurance purposes, you're employees, not tenants. You get the health plan, which covers Talia. I get the tax write-off and the documentation my insurer needs. Sandra had picked up the document before I finished the sentence. She was scanning. Her eyes moved the way people's eyes move when they are looking for the number that confirms what they want to hear. Salary, insurance, cost to them. The dental is included, she asked. Vision, dental, prescriptions, I said. Talia's inhaler would be fully covered. I watched her make her decision. It took approximately 4 seconds. There are maintenance logs here, Derek said, frowning at page 3. Weekly submissions. Just for the IRS, I said. In case I get audited, you literally just write down that you tested the smoke detectors or accepted a package. It takes 3 minutes. The paper trail is what matters, not the hours. He looked at Sandra. She gave him a small nod. He picked up the pen. I kept my face very still while they signed. Both of them, both signatures on the last page. I countersigned and dated it and put one copy in the folder and slid them the other. Great, I said. I will get you on the insurance by end of week. And I will send over the camera installation schedule. I need to put a few in the common areas for the insurance documentation. Living room, kitchen, entryway. It's in the agreement, section 9. All standard stuff. Sandra looked up briefly. Cameras? For the insurer, I said. Not the bedrooms, obviously. Just the common areas. Right, she said, and looked back at her copy of the document she had just signed authorizing exactly that. I hugged Derek. I told Sandra I would send the insurance forms by Thursday. I went downstairs, got in my car, drove back to the Marriott, and ordered a very large breakfast. The cameras arrived the next morning via overnight shipping. I had already pre-registered them and linked them to my phone. I gave the building super a copy of the signed agreement showing I was entitled to install them, and he helped me get them up in 90 minutes while Derek was out getting Talia from school. Sandra was home but did not question it. She had signed the paperwork. She had decided this was fine. By 6 o'clock that evening, I had a live 4K feed from my living room, kitchen, and entryway on my phone. I was sitting in my hotel room watching it like a very depressing reality show. Sandra was on the phone. She was walking back and forth in front of my grandmother's reading chair. She's completely naive, Sandra said, apparently to someone she was comfortable being honest with. She thinks this is a caretaker arrangement. We're just living here. What is she going to do, fire us? We have a contract. We're practically tenants at this point. She paused, listening. No, I read it, she said. It's basically a lease, housing in exchange for services. We have occupancy rights. She had read it. She had read it and understood it the way someone who has never worked in real estate understands a legal document. Which is to say, she had understood the part that sounded like what she wanted and skipped past the part that quietly removed every protection she assumed she had. I opened the background check report that had come in that afternoon. I had authorized the check under Section 11 of their signed agreement. The report had been generated by the firm we use for commercial tenant screening. It was thorough. It was not good. Sandra had 2 prior evictions, one in 2019, one in 2022. She had an active civil judgment against her for $11,000 in unpaid rent and property damage from a landlord in Phoenix who had filed suit 18 months ago and had apparently been unable to serve her. The process server notes indicated she had moved 4 times in 14 months. She had not lost her lease because the new place fell through. She had been evicted. And she had been running, and now she was in my apartment, telling someone on the phone that she was effectively a tenant, while an active process server was somewhere in the city looking for her current address. I put my phone face down on the hotel bed and sat very still for a moment. Then I picked it up and started working. I drafted the termination of employment notice that night. Short, clean, professional. Effective immediately. per Section 7 of the signed agreement, housing access revoked upon termination. Please vacate by 5 p.m. the following day. I sent it by email with delivery confirmation at 9 p.m. Then I texted Derek, check your email. I am sorry that it came to this. Please call me when you are ready to talk calmly. Then I called the court clerk's office that handled the civil judgment against Sandra, found the case number, and called the process-serving firm listed on the court docket. I told them I had a current address for their subject. I gave them mine. Then I opened the smart home app. My grandmother had installed a building management system 3 years before she died. She was meticulous about the apartment. The system controlled the thermostats, the door locks, the appliance connections, the internet router. I had the master account. They did not know it existed. It had never come up. At 9 p.m., I changed the door codes. At 9:15, I turned off the Wi-Fi. At 9:30, I dropped the thermostat to 54 degrees and locked it at the panel level so it could not be adjusted locally. The cameras showed Sandra walk to the thermostat at 9:32 and stare at it for a long time. She picked up her phone. I watched her type. 30 seconds later, my phone buzzed. This is insane. We have a contract. You can't do this. I replied, per Section 7 of the agreement you signed, employment termination results in immediate revocation of housing license. You are not a tenant. You signed a caretaker agreement, not a lease. Please vacate by 5 p.m. tomorrow. The police will be called at 5001 if you are still on the premises. She called me. I did not answer. She called Derek. On camera, I watched him come out of the hallway, looking pale. They had a conversation I could not fully hear. The audio was less clear from that angle, but I could read the shape of it. He was telling her something was wrong. She was telling him I could not do this. He was telling her to call her sister. She was pacing. At 10:45, a process server knocked on my door. I know this because the camera showed him. Suit jacket, clipboard. The particular posture of someone who does this job regularly and has learned to stand at a slight angle so the door cannot be slammed fully in their face. Sandra answered. I watched her face change the moment she saw what he was holding. She tried to close the door. He had already placed the documents over the threshold. In my state, that constitutes valid service. She stood in my living room holding an $11,000 civil judgment and the news that she had officially been found. Derek came out. She showed him the papers. He sat down in the reading chair. He put his face in his hands. At 11:20, my phone showed the door camera, Sandra's sister arriving with 2 tote bags. At midnight, Derek carried Talia out in a blanket, still asleep. Sandra followed with both suitcases. At 12:14, the door closed. I sat in my hotel room and did not feel triumphant. I felt something more like relief, which is different, quieter, less satisfying in the moment and more lasting. The particular stillness of a problem that had been handled correctly. I went back to my apartment at 7 in the morning. The IKEA shelf was still partially assembled in the corner. There was a child's drawing on my refrigerator. Talia's, purple crayon, something that might have been a horse or a cloud, that I took down carefully and set on the counter instead of throwing away. The kitchen was not as bad as I expected. Sandra had at least done the dishes before she left. I called a cleaning service. By noon, the apartment smelled like clean floors and citrus spray. The reading chair was back where it belonged. I made coffee in my own kitchen and drank it standing at the window looking out at the 14th floor view that my grandmother had looked at for 30 years and decided to leave to me specifically. My mother called 4 times before noon. I let them all go to voicemail. She left a message on the 3rd call. I played it once. It was what I expected. Shocked, disappointed, something about how families take care of each other, how I could have simply talked to them like an adult. I thought about calling back. I thought about explaining all of it. The agreement, the legal distinction, the background check, the civil judgment Sandra had been running from, the fact that they had used a spare key to occupy my property without my knowledge while I was in another state. I decided not to. Not yet. Some conversations need time to become productive, and this one was not there. Instead, I sent Derek one text. When you are ready to talk without Sandra present, I am open to it. I love you. But what you did was not okay, and I need you to actually understand that before we can move forward. He did not reply that day. That was okay. I was not in a hurry. I sat down in my grandmother's reading chair and opened a book I had been trying to finish for 3 months. Outside, the city moved and hummed the way it always does, indifferent and constant. Inside, there was quiet. Sandra now had an active judgment being enforced and a second address on her service record. Derek had a conversation coming that he could not avoid forever, and I had learned something I probably should have understood earlier, something my grandmother tried to tell me once, in a way I was not ready to hear. She had said, "The people who love you will respect your limits without needing to be punished for crossing them. The ones who keep crossing them are not confused about where the line is. They just decided it does not apply to them." She had been talking about someone else entirely, a neighbor, an old friend who had borrowed something and never returned it. I understood now that she had been talking about family too. She had been leaving me the tools I would need. I turned the page. I have thought about that night in the parking garage a lot since then. The gray fluorescent light, the cold concrete smell, the way I sat there gripping my phone and feeling the particular humiliation of being locked out of something that was legally, undeniably mine. I was not sad exactly. I was something more like disoriented. The way you feel when the people who were supposed to be on your side reveal, without any drama or apology, that they simply are not. What Derek and Sandra did was not spontaneous. That is the part people miss when they hear this story. They did not panic and make a bad call in a desperate moment. They planned. They waited for me to be 1,200 miles away. They coordinated with my mother. They moved furniture. They enrolled Talia in school. Every one of those steps required a decision, and at every step, they decided that my property, my grandmother's home, my space, was less important than their convenience. That is not a mistake. That is a choice, made slowly, repeatedly, by people who had calculated that I would absorb it. I used to think that loyalty meant giving people the benefit of the doubt past the point where the doubt was reasonable. I thought that was what love looked like in practice. Swallowing the discomfort, smoothing it over, keeping the peace. What I understand now is that I was not keeping the peace. I was funding it. There is a difference, and it took standing outside my own door at 31 years old to finally feel it in my body rather than just understand it abstractly. The caretaker agreement I drafted was not revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I think people hear the story and assume I was being cruel or calculated in a cold way. I was being precise. There is a distinction. Cruelty wants the other person to suffer. Precision just wants the situation to be accurate. I did not want Derek to lose anything. I wanted the reality of who owned what and who had agreed to what to be documented clearly, so that when things fell apart, and I knew they would fall apart, because Sandra's history made that outcome inevitable, there would be no ambiguity about where everyone stood legally. Sandra had been running from a judgment for 18 months. She had moved 4 times. She had found my apartment and decided it was the place to stop running, and she had brought my brother along for cover. That is a thing that still sits heavy with me, not what she did, but that Derek either did not know or did not ask. Both of those possibilities say something I have had to sit with for a while. The consequences they faced were not things I invented. The civil judgment existed before I was involved. The process server was already looking for her. I just stopped being the obstacle between her and the truth she had been outrunning. That is all I did. I stepped aside and let the existing reality catch up. What I keep coming back to is what my grandmother said about limits. She was right that people who respect you will not need to be punished for crossing a line. They will simply not cross it. But I think there is a second part she did not say. Maybe because she thought I would figure it out. The people who keep crossing are not confused, and you cannot love someone clearly when you are also continuously absorbing the cost of their choices. At some point, absorbing the cost is not generosity. It is just damage that has not been named yet. I am still Derek's sister. I texted him that. I meant it. But I am also someone who lives in her grandmother's apartment, in the quiet she was supposed to have, with the reading chair where it belongs and no one in her kitchen who was not invited. That is not a small thing. It took me longer than it should have to understand that it was something worth protecting.